Our next speaker is Kennedy Elliott, who is of the Washington Post, a graphics editor there. And Kennedy Elliott has done a lot of great work. She's actually been part of 2 projects that won Pulitzer Prizes. And she looks at a lot of hidden things. So she's looked at dark money. One of her Pulitzer projects was on the NSA, kind of looking at what goes on in the intelligence community. And she recently used data to debunk the myth of the groundhog, the fact that the groundhog can actually tell us when winter is coming or going. So thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
We look forward to it.
Yeah, that was an important one. All right, let's see here. Okay, awesome. Hey. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how we get from large spreadsheets of data to actual data stories. And there's a subtitle to this presentation, and it's a human-centered approach to data visualizations and data stories. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking about like the right or wrong way to do things. I'm just going to be talking about trends that I see that I think are really cool and interesting. And also, I'm characterizing database interactives as interactives that have like large sets of data. Yeah, and then the trend that I'm seeing is that whether journalists and storytellers know it or not, they're increasingly incorporating more of a human-centered approach to designing database interactives. So I've been a little obsessed with human-centered approaches to web stuff ever since I started coding and creating data visualizations. And I'm not an expert, and I don't have any formal training in it, but I really believe that applying human-centered workflows to things will really solve a lot of our unknowns in interactive graphics and visualizations. So how do we make a human-centered visualization? Well, there are 2 steps. One is we survey all the possible ways our readers can interact with our data, and 2, we anticipate their actions. How do we distinguish between these 2 steps? Well, one is a technical process, and the other one is a human one. It's psychological. For example, imagine you're designing a website for a restaurant. You have various data points, the menu, the hours, the location, and perhaps some information about the chef. In the case of Red Rooster in New York, which is one of my favorite restaurants, they want you to know about their supper club, see photos of the place, get information on private dining and artists and something called the Nook. It's a pretty big, busy website on desktop. Red Rooster wants its users to have access to all of this information, which is step 1. We survey the data and we create a pathway for users to access this information. But what about the human-centered approach? This is step 2, anticipating users' needs. Let's talk about the mobile site, which will highlight this point very well. What if you did some research and discovered that most people trying to access the mobile site of the restaurant want to know 2 key things? It's the location and the hours. You would put this information front and center on the mobile site, right? This is step 2, anticipating needs. We allow the user to have access to all of the data points, but they're not all equal. We anticipate needs for the mobile user and emphasize accessibility to some of the information based on what we know of the majority of our users. This is how we start incorporating human-centered design to our site. Let's apply this concept to data visualization. Let's pretend we have a data set about life expectancy in all the countries in the world, as well as that country's per capita GDP or income. And we want to start making inferences about how income correlates to life expectancy and vice versa. We have about 200 years worth of this data. This is what I would consider a database interactive, just has a lot of data. So what do? We build a scatter plot where each country represents a bubble on the scatter plot, and along the x-axis we have income, and along the y-axis we have life expectancy. This is a really popular Gapminder visualization. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. So we could leave the data plotted like this. I mean, the user has access to all of the data points, and they can see for each year what country has what income or life expectancy. But that's not really nailing the storytelling portion of this piece, is it? And we're not really giving the reader anything they can work with. It's just a big database, not a story. Any great visualizer would anticipate that the reader would want to know how all these years work together. They want to see the trend. So this is a slightly different picture of the website with everything that it currently has in it. And we could take it a step further and anticipate how the user will want to interact with our piece. The user wants to see things animated, so we have this play button down at the bottom, as well as a scrubber or slider, whatever you want to call it, that allows the bubbles to animate on cue. Those are elements of part part of step 2, which is to go above and beyond simply displaying the database and actually anticipating how people will manipulate the controls to see the information they want. An easy way to accomplish this is just to highlight the unique trend in your database. Make it easy to find and notice. I would argue that the reader's goals and the storyteller's goals are one and the same in this one section. The storyteller wants to highlight the most important trend in the database, and the reader wants to be sure to discover it. Other ways to create human-centered features is to continue a dialogue as the reader searches through the database that aids comprehension or injects some meaning into the piece. What we don't want is just to dump a bunch of data in the browser and tell the reader to go find it. This is anti-human-centered design. We want to ramp up the storytelling cues in our work, which directly benefits the reader. For example, I would argue that putting annotations on top of the scatter plot to explain the colors of the bubbles so that readers don't have to glance up at the top right corner to figure out where these countries are, what the colors represent in which regions of the world. And those animations can either follow the animation throughout or just appear on the first and last frames. Other human-centered visualizations considerations include like prompts, steppers, annotations, highlights, and buttons. So here's one that I think accomplishes this really well from the New York Times. It is a big old long piece. It has some sort of relevance in sports that I'm not familiar with, but it is obviously the data is very, very carefully laid out. And so there's no confusion where there doesn't need to be, and there's calamity, these purple spots, which are the interesting parts that they're trying to get you to look at. And what I think is so great about this is that they have not just simply left the data visualization as it is, which is no small feat. I'm sure this was an incredibly challenging piece to bring to life, but they are annotating as they go down, and they're adding this reporting layer that the reader really needs, I think. They don't always have the luxury of getting with certain interactives, but they're able to have that. So it just goes down for a long time. That's really cool. Another one is this really, really great piece from Bloomberg, and it's talking about breaking world records and temperatures. And there's this great animation that goes, it's pretty fast, and it kind of crescendos like a movie would. And these bold lines are the record breakers. And as you get closer to the current era, it's happening more and more, and it's kind of like, your heart's beating faster, and you're like, oh God, it's heating up everywhere. And I thought that was a brilliant way to display this data set. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. They could have just left the data like this and maybe bolded the record-breaking years in the last 10, 20, 30 years, whatever. But that animation, I think, really gave it a nice storytelling aspect. And they have these user interface selections up here to help you interpret the graphic. So we have the difference between a good visualizer and a great visualizer, the ability to anticipate needs of the audience. We are not simply displaying our data points, we are making them fun and intuitive to manipulate, and we are also promoting or emphasizing certain actions we perceive are important to the user. Now that I've gotten through all of this, I want to get to the real crux of my piece here. There's a third step, and it has to do with presenting a cohesive story within a larger narrative. In the olden days of interactives, and even today, because we're even still struggling with this at the Washington Post, the article and the interactive were on two separate pages, linked together by a graphic promo or a hyperlink of some kind. They were two disparate items, which creates a disjointed experience for the reader. The reader has to interrupt the flow of the text narrative at a certain point and move over to a new page to view the visual graphic. Somewhere between needing to report, clean, analyze, interpret, and visualize data, we've forgotten our primary purpose, which is to tell stories. We've gotten accustomed to displaying the database as a story, but often the interactive itself is just not enough. We need text or a larger narrative of some kind. So to recap, the first step in creating a human-centered interactive is simply just to display the information, which any good visualizer needs to do well. Just make an appropriate visualization for your database and slap that information up there. It's kind of a low bar. So the second step is to think about the user and how the user may interact with the database and which actions he or she prioritizes. The third step is to give the piece proper narrative context with your reporting, insights, and conclusions. Structure the accompanying text strategically so that the visualization and the text are fused together, presenting a unified, homogeneous package. This is really the forefront of database storytelling at the moment. And how do we practically accomplish this? So let's go back to the Gapminder example and see what Hans Rosling came up with. And I think you guys have probably seen this video before. It's nothing new. He basically projects the visualization as a hologram, and he's behind it talking in this very spirited, animated voice about all of these really interesting trends, and he selects certain years that are particular, where the World War I, all the countries just have this dramatic fall, and at one point he completely dissects China and gets into the regions and how income compares with like life expectancy, and he singles out regions, as I said, that might do better as an annotation on the graphic. And so this is a really clever and interesting way, and I know it's a few years old now, but it's really stuck with me. I don't expect everyone to do a hologram video of their work, but it's impossible to watch this without getting the message. I mean, you're definitely going to come away, your reader is going to get what you're trying to say here. And for that reason, I think it's great. And Hannah talked about this earlier, but here are some other ways that I'm seeing text and narrative infused with the visualization itself. And so this is really common, and this is just one example of many people who are doing this. But that helmet interactive, there's sections with a little key here for a progress bar, and there's little chunks of text, and they walk you through several charts or graphs or something, and they give you enough to know about that graph, and overall it packages out this narrative. This Bloomberg piece did the same thing. It's got a stepper treatment up here. We use this very often. This was a neat little piece. The interactive itself wouldn't be enough, and when we need this text, even though it's very small in this one, we need this text to really understand what they're trying to say. And it's short and sweet, and I think it works really well. Quartz has this really interesting one about everything that's orbiting the Earth, and you can let's just see it. You can see it animated, and they've kind of given it that New York Times NCAA treatment, where they've animated the whole way through. This is probably going to kill my computer, but you're just pulled in so many different ways. The animation does a big part of it, but these little annotations really help too, and you can of course get more information if you hover, but it's a really, really neat thing. National Geographic has been making these really immersive pieces that are kind of like those section graphics where there's a little bit of text and then you move to a different scene. But National Geographics they tend to be very immersive. Like I said, there's a little progress stepper over here, and they have been doing more with 3D, which is, I would really check this one out. It's really interesting to go inside a big cave in China. This is one that we did. The reason that this is kind of fusing the text and the interactive is that here we have little highlights that as you're reading, you can directly look back at the graphic and see how they're connected, and you can really point out the trends that we're specifically referring to in the text. This is a really cool one from Vermont Public Radio. It's just one guy did this whole thing. I thought it was really impressive, but this is what I refer to as like text chunking. There's some text, and then you get a big graphic, and then this one has like 3 or so disparate graphics with a big headline and explanation. But like I said, altogether it's packaged as a story, and I think he did a really great job. Especially just one person. It's really impressive. Finally, this is another one that I liked a lot from, this is more of a static piece, It's from the Upshot, and it has a lot of text, but I commonly refer to this as like having the perfect text to chart ratio. It's talking about the racial divide, and it has, you know, charts accompanying it, I think at like a really great rate. And it really, you don't really think of this as an article because there are so many graphics that go along with it. So this is another one that involves text chunking. And then lastly, this great satellite interactive from ProPublica features really long stories throughout and different ways to interact with it all along. You're kind of going on a journey, kind of like the National Geographic one. You go along different pages and you can zoom in. All the while, the map is stationary and you're zooming into different places, and there are different controls. So this is absolutely an immersive experience between text and graphic. Okay, so yeah, so finally, I would argue that human-centered design is a natural process to telling better stories, and that you and your reader's goals are mostly aligned. You want to tell better stories, and your reader wants you to tell better stories. Do the reporting and show the reader exactly what they should be getting out of your piece. Through your choice of visualization, the user interface tools that you create to go with it, and your additional reporting and insights. And then that's it.